Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. Today we have a great presenter, Dave Marcum. I'm going to get out of the way from here. He's retired from the Air Force, and he's retired from LCCC. He was a professor there, and he's a great presenter. And as you recall, he's the one who presented Operation Fugo, the Japanese war balloons. He's awesome. So we're happy to have him.
So thank you. This is always so gratifying to come to a presentation. You laugh. I've been to presentations where nobody shows up, and so so it's always gratifying to come and talk to a crowd like you guys. Cindy appreciates it, and I appreciate it. So today I'm going to talk to you about Amelia Earhart, a story that just is like Energizer Bunny. Amelia Earhart just keeps going and going and going and going and going. And if you're not familiar with her story, she actually spent some time here in Wyoming, more than a lot of people know. And you may not know it, but I'm pretty sure Amelia Earhart actually showed up in Newcastle at one point in her career. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So as I indicated on my title slide here, this is a story in 6 parts. So it's very episodic. She didn't come and stay like years. She kind of fled through the state and then came back. So it's a very episodic story. And I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction as to an attempt to explain why she kept coming back to Wyoming. First of all, my name is Dave Marcum. That's when I was cute.
That is really.
Yeah. To kind of start things, I apologize beforehand if I offend anybody. Although talking about Amelia Earhart, I don't think there's anything very controversial here. But if I do offend somebody, I apologize beforehand. If I do, please let me know, okay? So I can adjust my talk. I do want to apologize. I am a bit hyperactive, okay? And so when I was a college professor, I hated college professors that stood at their podium and that's not me, okay? So I'm the kind of person, I wander around, okay? So I apologize if that becomes a bit distracting. I'm going to have to be careful because I'll trip on the cord. Okay. So one of the things that I find frustrating about, I taught political science at LCCC, government. Okay. But government involves a lot of history. And one of the things that really frustrates me about talking about history and historical episodes is that very seldom do you get the context. And so I'm going to give you some really brief context, again, by way of explaining why Amelia Earhart kept coming back to Wyoming. So here's that brief introduction to the early years of aviation in Wyoming. You may not know this, but the very first flight in Wyoming occurred in Gillette on July 4th, 1911. Aviation really struggled to get going in Wyoming because if you know anything about, look at this. This airplane is frail, underpowered, isn't going anywhere in a hurry, and our altitudes really challenge these airplanes to operate, and so aviation kind of struggled to get going here in the state. In 1919, though, things did start going big time. At the end of World War I, there was a flying circus that toured the West, actually performed in Sheridan and Cheyenne. There was what was called a transcontinental reliability and endurance test came through the southern part of the state and established something that was called the Transcontinental Airway. And if you've never heard of the Transcontinental Airway, it's every bit as important as the Oregon Trail. It's every bit as important as the Union Pacific Railroad. It's every bit as important as the Lincoln Highway, and yet nobody talks about it. But that's the primary reason that Amelia Earhart kept coming through the state of Wyoming, was the existence of the Transcontinental Airway. You had some Army recruiting junkets came through the state in 1919. In 1920, the airmail started flying through southern Wyoming following the Transcontinental Airway. The airmail flew through Wyoming 1920 to 1927. Before that, there was a Pathfinder trip that actually studied the Transcontinental Airway, made sure the facilities were up to par, were ready to go. And that's what was important about the Transcontinental Airway, because if you know anything about early airplanes, they didn't go very far. Okay, at best maybe 3 hours endurance if there was no wind. In Wyoming there's always a wind, and so there had to be landing fields where the pilots could find them, and that's what made the Transcontinental Airway so important, is that people could fly through the state, fly through the western part of the country, and know that there are airfields, there are places you could get gas, you could get your airplane fixed and things like that. On this particular trip, Eddie Reckenbacker made his first appearance in the state of Wyoming. So if you don't know about the Transcontinental Airway, and this was what was important about the airmail, basically connected New York with San Francisco, and again, numerous airfields along the airway. So pilots, if they had trouble, could land gas and then things like that. So that's why Amelia kept coming to the state of Wyoming. Of course, associated with the facilities that the airmail established were these navigation aids. This is up on Sherman Hill between Laramie and Cheyenne, if you're familiar with that part of the state. The military used the Transcontinental Airway. Lindbergh and other barnstormers came to the state because of the Transcontinental Airway. Russell Mohan flew basically coast to coast in sunshine because of the Transcontinental Airway. Wyoming was very important in the development of commercial aviation because of the Transcontinental Airway. At one time, Cheyenne had the largest aircraft maintenance facility in the country. The stewardess training school was in Cheyenne, the pilot training school was in Cheyenne. So again, Wyoming very, very involved in the development of commercial aviation in the state. Byrd, after he flew up in the Arctic, brought his airplane through the state. Charles Lindbergh, after he flew to Paris, did a tour around the country, came through the state, stopped at multiple places. A French aviator flew around the world, stopped off in the state. Will Rogers periodically stopped in the state, flying United Airlines on the Transcontinental Airway. We had some air-to-air refueling experiments occurred in the state. There was a Russian airplane flew over the country. It wasn't Russian, it was Soviet. Flew through our airspace. Basically flew from Moscow to New York City, but went to Moscow to Vladivostok, to Juneau, to Seattle, to San Francisco, and then picked up the Transcontinental Airway and flew to New York. He had the Ford Aviation Tour. One of its tours came to the state. This is kind of a fun one. Well, we won't go into it. We're not going to talk about this, but yeah, the Treaty Flyers came through the state. More World Flyers came through the state. Jimmy Doolittle, Frank Hawks came through the state. The Army Air Corps mail operation operated in the state. Eleanor Roosevelt came through the state. Traveling under an alias, she called herself Mrs. Schneider. Yes. Okay, well, hold on a second. Okay, so Miss Schneider was help me out here. An alias. Okay, her daughter was living in Seattle at the time, and so she made periodic flights from D.C. up to Seattle, came through Cheyenne.
Okay, you got this
Transcontinental Airway.
Yeah. Airway.
Yeah.
And it appears it just goes straight across the middle of the United States,
Right.
pretty much.
It followed the Union Pacific Railroad, basically.
Okay.
Between Chicago and San Francisco.
Okay, so, and the idea was that they made this route and they built airports all along the route.
Right, so in Wyoming, you had an airfield. In Cheyenne, you had an airfield in Rawlins, you had an airfield in Rock Springs.
That they would be able to stop
And they had to stop there because remember these airplanes can only fly like about 3 hours.
Okay.
So between Chicago and now we're really wandering off. So make it quick. Between Chicago and San Francisco, let's just do this. Between Chicago and Salt Lake City, you had an airfield in Chicago, you had an airfield Iowa City, Omaha, North Platte, Cheyenne, Rawlins, Rock Springs, and then Salt Lake City. And they were required to stop at each one of those places to gas up, change airplanes, hand over mail and things like that, because the airplanes just didn't fly very far.
And they didn't fly at night.
Initially, no, but if you go back, remember the beacon down at Sherman? So eventually they lit the airway so that they could fly at night, because initially they were only flying during the daytime, but they couldn't compete with the railroads flying just a day. And so once they developed the technology and lit the airway, they actually did fly at night, and it became a 24-hour operation. I'm actually writing a book about this. Yeah.
Cool.
It's taking forever because I'm anal and I keep rewriting. And one of these days, though, yeah, I'll come up here and autograph it when you buy it. Okay? Yeah. So, Rosa, this is kind of a fun story. So Douglas built a this is one of our very first four-engined aircraft. The original DC-4. The original DC-4 had 3 tails. Douglas didn't sell any, at least to commercial interests. So the Japanese government bought the DC-4 and used it to learn how to build big airplanes. They turned it into a 4-engine bomber. That came through Wyoming. So again, you have to kind of understand that context, understand why Amelia Earhart kept coming through the state, because actually Wyoming had a lot of aviation activity going on during this period. Okay, so I'm not going to assume that you know a lot about Amelia Earhart, so brief biography here. She was born in 1897 in Kansas. Her father was an attorney, worked for the railroads, and so they bounced around all over the place. She graduated from high school in Chicago and started attending a ladies' school, if you will, in Pennsylvania. In 1918, she went up to Toronto to spend some time with her sister, who was caring for wounded soldiers from World War I, decided she wanted to be a nurse, enrolled in Columbia University to become a nurse, but then decided, maybe not, went out to California to meet her parents, and while she was in California, she saw an airplane flying around and got bit by the bug, okay? Started taking flying lessons. By the way, she was taught to fly by a female pilot, okay? Amelia Earhart was not the first female pilot in the United States. She actually was the 16th, so she was actually taught to fly by a female pilot in California. Bought an airplane, a little Kenner Airster, went to Boston, started working in a settlement house. If you know anything about settlement houses, back in the early 1900s, when you had a big influence of immigrants into the country. It's about the time my own great-grandparents came to the country. Various entities would set up settlement houses to help those people settle into the country and learn the ins and outs of living in the United States. So she became a social worker, working in a settlement house. Became an agent for Kenner, was selling the airplane, got her aviation license. And then in 1927, Charles Lindbergh makes his trip across the Atlantic, flies to Paris, okay? And a bunch of people are watching what Charles Lindbergh is doing, and they decide, and again, this is a gimmick, okay, that, gee, wouldn't it be cool if we could get a lady to fly across the Atlantic? And so George Putnam, who's working for Putnam Publishing, he's the heir of the Putnam Publishing fortune, and some of his compatriots start looking around for a potential female pilot to fly across the Atlantic, and Amelia Earhart just happens to be in the right place at the right time, and they invite her to join this little project. She doesn't fly the airplane, she's basically a passenger. Okay, she's not qualified really to fly across the Atlantic, but nonetheless, she and 2 male pilots, co-pilots, fly across the Atlantic in a trimotor, a Fokker trimotor, land in Wales, and then go into Southampton. She becomes idealized by the British, first woman to fly across the Atlantic, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. If you look right here in this picture, you can see her. Right there she is. Yeah, yeah. While she was in England, she meets another female aviator by the name of Mary Lady Heath, who at the time is probably the most famous female aviator in the world. She is an interesting story in her own right. Was married 3 times. Her marriages were kind of rocky. At one point, she's married to a British aristocrat. They have a falling out while they're on a tour of Africa. To make her happy, her husband buys her an airplane, and Mary Heath basically flies her little airplane all the way from Cape Town back to London and becomes the first person of any gender to make that kind of a flight. Okay? Amelia Earhart meets Lady Mary Heath, falls in love with her little airplane, and buys it from her. Okay, so this is the same airplane that Lady Heath had just flown from Cape Town to London, and Amelia Earhart says, "Guy, I love that airplane, gotta have it," so she buys it. Puts it on a boat. This airplane is not going to fly across the Atlantic, and ships the airplane back to the United States. While in England, though, she's taught how to fly that particular airplane by this individual. Puts it on a boat, ships it back to the United States. Then, with her little airplane, Amelia Earhart decides, gee, I want to go on a trip. I want to fly my little airplane out to Los Angeles. And she doesn't really do it to prove anything, according to her, okay? She's just doing this to have fun. She just wants to take a vacation. She just wants to go out and to see the country. So on August 31st, 1928, Earhart departed Rye, New York with George Putnam, okay? They make it as far as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where she crashes, okay? And I'm going to stop right now because I feel obligated to defend Amelia Earhart, particularly after the disaster that ultimately befalls her. She took a lot of heat. A lot of people accused her of not being a really, really, really good pilot. I don't think you accomplish what you accomplish if you're not a really, 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 really good pilot. Every time she crashed, though, Amelia Earhart, blah, 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 blah. In my study of the airmail here in Wyoming, I've gotten to know some of the pilots that flew the airmail quite well. My favorite is a gentleman by the name of Hal Collison. He had at least 40 crash landings flying the mail in Wyoming. Nobody accused Hal Collison of being a bad pilot. Jack Knight, probably the most famous airmail pilot, crashed multiple times. Nobody accused Jack Knight of being a bad pilot. Okay, Amelia Earhart was not a bad pilot. I think Amelia Earhart, though, was driven to prove a point, and she maybe sometimes took risks that she shouldn't have taken. But fundamentally, I think she was a pretty good pilot. Anyway, crash lands in Pittsburgh, has to have the airplane fixed. Putnam goes back to New York, the airplane gets fixed, and Amelia Earhart continues on her way and ends up in Los Angeles. It's about the same time that Los Angeles is celebrating the opening of Mines Field, which was one of Los Angeles' first major modern airfields. Mines Field eventually becomes LAX, if you've ever flown through that particular zoo, okay? She didn't participate in the festivities, but she was there just kind of having fun, okay? Earhart then departs Glendale for Las Vegas, Salt Lake City. Between Las Vegas and Salt Lake City, for reasons unknown, she has another crash landing. The airplane's put on a train, shipped to Salt Lake City. The airplane is fixed, and Amelia Earhart continues on her way. And lo and behold, so she picks up the Transcontinental Airway in Salt Lake City to head east. Lo and behold, she shows up in Cheyenne on October 8th, okay? And I love the newspaper account of her appearing in town. And this is a direct quote. Okay, photographers at the airfield had to wait until Miss Earhart performed that genuinely feminine duty, powder her nose, and then shutters clicked while that famous smile spread over her face. So first of all, that was a cross she had to bear. This notion that somehow being a pilot defeminized her, and so she was always forced to kind of prove that yes, I am a woman. Okay, proud. She was actually very proud to be a woman. But I look at this picture, I don't see a happy smile on that face. I see okay, take your damn picture. Let me get on my way. Okay, yeah, leave me alone. I got business to take care of, but still. Yeah, so that's actually Amelia Earhart in Cheyenne standing in front of her little Avro Avian airplane. She continues on the Transcontinental Airway, North Platte, Omaha, Chicago, Cleveland, blah, 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 arrives back in New York City, where she takes a job at Cosmopolitan as an editor. and actually writes several articles about flying and the joys of flying and why women should be encouraged to fly and da-da-da and things like that. And some of the articles were actually quite good. In July 1920, this is kind of a digression here, July 1929, Earhart went deep sea diving off of Block Island, Rhode Island, with Putnam and his first wife. So she's palling around a lot with George Putnam and his first wife.
In addition to the weekly printed version of the newsletter journal, we also promote our community and share important information on our award-winning website, newslj.com, and in our weekly email newsletter, Nuke Now. We also connect with readers through various social media platforms and invite you to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can even take a look at a recent meeting of the City Council, School Board, or County Commission on our YouTube channel. We do hope that you will go to newslj.com and subscribe today, and we look forward to making all of our great content available to you. But regardless of your level of support, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for doing your part to preserve a free and independent local press.
In July 1920, this is kind of a digression here, July 1929, Earhart went deep sea diving off of Block Island, Rhode Island, with Putnam and his first wife. So she's palling around a lot with George Putnam and his first wife. Okay, so that was episode 1. Episode 2, Amelia flies an autogyro. This is 1931. Okay, so what's an autogyro? An autogyro is this weird looking airplane. Okay, the autogyro is a powered airplane that has an additional propeller above it that is not powered. Okay, so the idea was that you take off in your conventionally powered airplane. As you gather speed, the other blades are going to start rotating and develop additional lift. Okay, but a lot of people think that this is kind of a hybrid airplane helicopter. Kind of, sort of, but the upper propellers were not powered, okay, unless you got going and then just the momentum of the airplane going forward got the propellers going. Invented by a Spanish engineer. Of course, you look at that, you know, that's kind of, obviously they started developing and making it cleaner. In this country, a gentleman by the name of Harold Pitcairn took the initial idea and developed it even further. The military even bought some copies to play around with it and see if there are military applications here. In 1931, that year, the Beechnut Corporation, Beechnut Gum, okay, agreed to sponsor Earhart in an attempt to complete a transcontinental autogyro flight. Okay. Problem was, another individual, a gentleman by the name of Johnny Miller, beat her to the punch. Okay, he actually flew an autogyro across country, which kind of took the wind out of Amelia's sails. But then she decided, okay, I'm going to do a round trip cross-country flight in an autogyro. So she takes her little Beechnut painted autogyro and starts off from Pennsylvania and flies across the Transcontinental Airway to San Francisco. On June 3rd, May 28th, she shows up. June 3rd, she shows up in Cheyenne. Here's a picture of the autogyro in Cheyenne. Stays 2 days, 3 days, almost 3 days in Cheyenne, because she gets her in Cheyenne. Next day, she flies the autogyro into Denver and lets the focus in Denver see her little toy. And then she comes back to Cheyenne, and then June 4th progresses west to San Francisco. Now, as you can imagine, the autogyro didn't have much range. Okay, it didn't have much range at all. So to get to Salt Lake City, she took off in Cheyenne, stopped in Laramie to get gas. Okay, took off, stopped in Parco to get gas. Parco is what we call Sinclair now. Okay, if you know where Sinclair is, they used to be Parco. Stopped and got gas. Okay, took off, made it as far as Rock Springs, stopped, got gas. Okay, took off again, stopped in Leroy, which there's no town called Leroy. It's a Union Pacific Railroad train stop. Okay, they just happened to build an emergency airfield adjacent to it. She had to stop there for gas, and she finally makes it into Salt Lake City. Part of the problem is, of course, is she's flying against the wind. And you fly against the wind in Wyoming, you're not going to make much progress. Okay, so this was a long. Yeah. So there's a little auto gyro in Cheyenne. This is her in Parco. Okay, and you can see why they put these airfields where they did, because there's absolutely nothing that they're going to run into if they have to land. Okay, I've actually been out there to where the airfield was, and it's. So she sat in the back cockpit, that was the pilot station, and then her mechanic rode up front. Okay, and these are, if you know anything about Amelia Earhart's flight in her autogyro, this is probably the most famous picture that was ever taken of her. This is in Rock Springs, and you can see the crowds that she attracted as she was flying cross country. Okay, gets to Oakland, then to Glendale, Phoenix, Abilene, where she crashes. Okay, yeah, she crashes. Caught a gust of wind and plopped her little autogyro into the ground. Now, a lot of people will tell you that's where the story ends. She crashed her autogyro and didn't make it any further than this. That's not true. Pitcairn actually sent her another airplane to Oklahoma City. She picked up her little airplane and she continued on and actually did, I guess, with a brief intermission, complete her round-trip autogyro flight between the coasts. Okay, so that's her original autogyro, and that's her second one. You can tell different markings. Okay, well. Okay, hold on.
I just had a question. What was the typical elevation that they would fly at?
It depended on weather. If you're talking clear skies in an autogyro, probably 5,000 to 10,000 feet, maybe. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's
Well, remember, if you get much higher than 10,000 feet, you're going to start running into oxygen issues. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and for them to go up that high and then to have to come back down.
Yeah. You're eating up fuel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you read the stuff that's been written about Amelia Earhart, they'll tell you about the autogyro flight, but they don't go into that kind of detail. I've not found anything though that indicates, at least through Wyoming, that she ran into weather issues. But in Wyoming, you always got the wind blowing. You always got the wind, okay? And so that's why. Takes off in Cheyenne, goes to Laramie. Takes off in Laramie, goes to Marcum. Takes off in Marcum, goes to Wyoming. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
This includes winter also.
What's that?
Winter also. Do they fly during?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, maybe not civilian pilots, but the airmails certainly did. Absolutely did, because they were trying to prove a point that an airplane can fly commercially in daylight, darkness, weather, high altitude, low altitude. That was the whole point of the airmail, was they were proving that we could do this kind of thing. There's this famous picture that's taken of Bob Ellis, who was an airmail pilot. He took off from Rock Springs, he's going to Salt Lake City, takes off from Rock Springs, banks, is heading over, makes his turn west of Salt Lake City, gets over White Mountain. If you guys, White Mountain in Rock Springs, it's that big, long ridge to the west of town, gets over White Mountain, probably got a downburst and drove him right into, but there's 6 foot of snow on the mountain, and he buried that airplane in the snow, and it took them forever to get that airplane off the mountain because of all the snow. So yeah, they flew, at least they're up. I don't think Amelia would have made this trip in the winter because there really wasn't any reason for her to be flying in the winter, but the airmail certainly did. Oh yeah, Amelia attends Frontier Days, yeah. Who doesn't attend Frontier Days? I leave town, by the way. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Frontier Days. Okay. So in 1929, Earhart bought a Lockheed Vega 5B airplane, which she called her Little Red Bus. This is a hot machine. By 1930 standards, this is a hot machine. I mean, she's got a good airplane. She ends up marrying, during this period, George Putnam. Okay. Yeah, on May 20th, 1932, okay, I love it. May 20th is my birthday, and I love that too. It's an easy date to remember, okay? So May 20th, which by the way is the date that Lindbergh started on his flight to So she started the same day that Lindbergh started his trip. Earhart took her little red bus and departed Newfoundland and was going to become the first woman to solo across the Atlantic. And she accomplished that feat, but only by about that much. She had mechanical issues, and she did run into weather, and she had equipment issues, and this and this and this, and she almost missed Europe. She actually comes down, her intent was to fly to Paris. She actually comes down in Northern Ireland, and about 5 miles from the coast. Okay, if she hadn't found Northern Ireland, the next landfall she was going to make was probably Scotland, and she was running out of gas, and I'm not sure if she hadn't found Northern Ireland, I'm not sure she would have made Scotland. But she does, not going to diminish what she did. She flew across the Atlantic, and of course, to international acclaim. She became the first woman and the only person since Charles Lindbergh to fly across the Atlantic solo. There have been multiple other attempts, but they all ended in disaster. She became the second person to fly across the Atlantic solo, which again is no mean feat given the technology that we're talking about, and the weather conditions and all that good stuff. Okay, so she comes back to the States and decides she's going to take her little red bus on a tour, and is on the Transcontinental Airway. And of course, as we've discussed, Cheyenne is right down in the middle of the Transcontinental Airway. And guess what goes on in July in Cheyenne on the Transcontinental Airway? Frontier Days. So she arrives in Cheyenne on July 23rd, 1932, smack dab in the middle of Cheyenne Frontier Days. That's probably not correct, because she gets there the same day that they're going to crown Miss Frontier. If you guys have never been to Frontier Days, there's always a Miss Frontier and a Miss Frontier lady in waiting and all that good stuff. And there's a little ceremony where they're giving them little crowns and their awards and all this kind of stuff. So she shows up in Cheyenne the same day that they're crowning Miss Frontier. And they wanted Earhart to take part in the festivities. She said, no. And I think I showed some class on her part, because the person who was Miss Frontier was Edith Gogurt, who I've tried to run down. She disappears. Okay, so this was her big moment in the sun. And Amelia Earhart understood that if she got involved, it was probably going to diminish that. So no, I'm not going to participate. But she did get her picture taken with Miss Frontier and various of the Frontier Days committee members, and her little red bus in the background. And she apparently had a very good time, because she ended up spending more time here in Cheyenne than she had originally planned. By the way, at the same time Amelia Earhart is in Cheyenne, the Vice President of the United States is in Cheyenne. He's traveling cross country via Union Pacific to Los Angeles to attend the Olympics. If you're paying attention to the date, 1932 was the first LA Olympics. And so Amelia Earhart is headed to LA in a little red bus, and the Vice President of the United States is headed to LA to attend the Olympics. And they're in Cheyenne at the same time. They meet up in LA, and the Vice President of the United States presents Amelia Earhart with the Distinguished Flying Cross. If you know anything about military awards, the Distinguished Flying Cross is a pretty big deal. And back in the 20s and the 30s, civilians were awarded Distinguished Flying Crosses because of their exploits in developing aviation and things like that. So here's a picture of the Vice President of the United States, Charles Curtis giving Amelia Earhart the Distinguished Flying Cross. Anybody know why Charles Curtis is famous, besides being Vice President? First Native American to become Vice President of the United States. In fact, the only Native American to become Vice President of the United States. And guys haven't been paying attention to the news?
No, apparently.
What's he got on his face? A mustache. He was the last vice presidential candidate before J.D. Vance to have facial hair.
Seriously?
What is wrong with you people?
Oh my gosh, I hadn't even noticed.
Well, they made such a big deal about that. And it was kind of like, oh my God, seriously? Yeah.
I've never even heard of Mr.
Well, no, he's another one, just kind of, flash in the pan. Okay, so, well, keep in mind who his president was. Yeah, Herbert Hoover. So, yeah. Okay, so Amelia takes a vacation. Okay, now this is where I started having fun.
Gosh.
Yeah. This is where I started having fun. Because you read her biography and everybody says, yeah, Amelia Earhart takes a vacation to Wyoming. And that's all they say. Amelia Earhart and George Putnam take a vacation in Wyoming. But there's no detail. And I'm the kind of person, okay, that's like raising a red flag in my nose. I want to know what the hell's going on here. How did she get here? What route did she take? Blah, 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 blah. What's the story? There's a story here. Okay? So, you are probably only the fourth group of people to be privileged to.
Whoa.
Yes. The efforts of my research, yes.
Thank you.
Here, pat me on the back, absolutely. Okay. So what I've been able to determine is that July 11th, she arrived in Cleveland by airplane from New York City. Drove to Lakeside, Ohio to talk to a woman's group. Jumped on an airplane, flew to Dubuque, Iowa. Got off the airplane and hooked up with George Putnam. Okay. He's got a car, and now it's road trip. Okay. So she's not flying now. We're driving cross country. Apparently, the two of them drove straight from Dubuque, Iowa, through Minnesota to Rapid City, South Dakota. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this because this is kind of a fascinating story. Okay, they visited the Strato Bowl. I'll explain that here in a minute. And then, and then drove from Rapid City. And this is where it's not entirely clear the route that she took to get to her vacation spot. She either went 16 or she went 14. Well, if you go back to 34, 16 was much more heavily traveled than 14 at the time. And to get on 14, she would have had to backtrack from Rapid City. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that she jumped on 16 to get to Cody.
Sure she did
Yes,
too.
and so if she's on 16, that means what? She came through Newcastle.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's your connection to aviation history. I'm pretty sure that Amelia Earhart showed up in Newcastle, Wyoming, which meant she also would have gone through Upton, Gillette, Buffalo, Moreland, Grable. We know she made it to Cody because there's a nice several paper write-ups, but apparently she ran afoul of law enforcement in Cody. I'm going to show you. She's driving this hot rod of a car and apparently makes this high-speed, illegal turn in the middle of Cody on Main Street, and the constabulary stopped her and said, "Don't ever do that again. Nice to meet you, Amelia Earhart. Continue on your way." Okay, so we know that she made it to Cody, and then from Cody she goes to Meeteetse, where she hooks up with Carl Dunrud, who's running a dude ranch outside of Meeteetse at an old mining town called Kerwin, and that's where she spends her vacation. Okay, if any of you know anything that can help me out here, I'd appreciate it, but I'm pretty sure she came through Newcastle. The problem is that as far as I can tell, she didn't keep diaries. I know that she wrote letters, but you can't find the letters. I cannot find letters that cover this particular period. So would it be cool if she talked about, because if she's on 16, she would have glimpsed Devil's Tower. Okay, regardless of if she's driving 16, 14, she's going over thank you, the Bighorns. With pretty dry, you would think she said something about that. It would be kind of nice if there was an account of, I can't find anything. So anyway, spent a couple of days at the Dude Ranch outside of Meeteetse. And then drove from Meeteetse to Thermopolis to Casper to Cheyenne. I'm sure of that because we know she stopped in Casper to get her car worked on. And guess what? July 27th, what's going on in Cheyenne? Frontier Days. So she shows up in Frontier Days for a second time, and we have an account of that. They had another good time in Cheyenne, and then she continues on her way from Sydney to Grand Island to Atchison, went to her hometown where she was born, Decatur, and Okay, so yeah, she took a vacation. So that's the car she was driving. Nice. Amelia Earhart liked fast cars, but it shouldn't surprise us. Okay, if you've ever seen the Maverick movies, Maverick likes driving. So I was an aircraft mechanic when I was in the Air Force. Pilots like they like Vets and they like Mustangs and they like this and they like that, and so it shouldn't surprise us that they like cars. This was kind of a cool car. It had a 12-cylinder air-cooled engine in it. This car could haul. Yes, ma'am.
How did she afford all this?
She's making pretty good money from all these indoors. Remember, she's working for Cosmopolitan, and she's getting a lot of sponsorship for. And Putnam kind of has money because he's the Putnam Publishers and all that good stuff. Yeah, she's got money. She's not doing bad. Isn't that a sweet car? That's a sweet car.
Who made it?
Okay, so here's where it really gets cool. Okay, and bear with me because I got a bit of a digression here. I'm going to assume that the reason she went to Rapid City was to visit the Strato Bowl where this was going on. The National Geographic Society and the United States Army Air Corps were engaged in a project to launch a balloon into the stratosphere. Okay, and so Amelia Earhart stops off in Rapid City at the Strato Bowl to visit the folks who are involved in this program. And you can see there's Amelia, there's George Putnam, there's one of the pilots, like pilots, you know, they're basically passengers. But yeah, she stopped in Rapid City to visit with these folks. And you look at that face, and you can tell that is a happy face. She's having a good time. And you can almost see the wheels turning. Maybe I want to be the first woman to be launched into the strato. I mean, you can see those wheels turning, absolutely. So here's Amelia, okay, talking with the two Army Air Corps pilots who are going to ride the balloon, okay. The balloon actually, again, a little bit of a digression here. The balloon was launched July 28, 1934. Okay, yeah, digression. So there's what the Strato Bowl looked for. So the National Geographic Society, the Army Air Corps, were looking for a place in the West that was relatively protected from the wind. I mean, they looked at sites in Wyoming, they looked at sites in Montana, they looked at sites in, but they found this natural bowl over here in the Black Hills that was perfect for them to launch their balloons.
The new store. This is the one-stop shop. We have a pharmacy. We have a bootlegger's liquor. The deli, the food that you can get at a lunchtime is so amazing. The coffee shop. Certain Friday mornings, there's 30 people sitting here in all these chairs. This is the hub for people to come and visit, have their coffee, have their donuts. It's amazing what this area has done. Totally amazing.
I mean, they looked at sites in Wyoming, they looked at sites in Montana, they looked at sites in, but they found this natural bowl over here in the Black Hills that was perfect for them to launch their balloons. So they developed this kind of a launch pad for the balloon. There it is being inflated, getting ready to launch. There it is launching. It actually made it to about 70,000 feet, and then things went to hell. The balloon punctured, and then it caught on fire, and it actually was carrying 4 people, and they barely made it out. They had parachutes, and they barely made it out before it hit the ground and exploded. So there it is rising, there it is starting to deflate, here it is completely disintegrating, and there it is impacting the ground. So the first attempt was a pretty near thing. But then, okay, not to be deterred, they tried a second time. This time they're going to use helium instead of hydrogen because it's less flammable. They launch the balloon on November 11th, 1935. It reached a record altitude of 72,000 feet, and the balloon landed safely in White Lake, South Dakota, which is about 250 miles east of the Strato Bowl. Among its many accomplishments, the crew were the first humans to document the curvature of the Earth. And by the way, these were America's first astronauts. They got into the stratosphere. They were America's first astronauts. And again, I go back to, I mean, boy, I got to give me some of this. This would be cool. First female astronaut, you betcha. So, I don't know, over in Gillette, the county has it's called the Rock Pile Museum. It's a pretty sweet little museum. They have this great collection of photographs that were taken of the second attempt. Apparently, the person who was running the Civilian Conservation Corps camp over in Gillette took a group of the CCC folks to Rapid City and took these pictures of the balloon. And like I said, there's a series of about 12 of them. And they're pretty amazing pictures. And I wouldn't be surprised if you couldn't sit here in Newcastle and maybe if you knew where to look, couldn't maybe see the speck as it kind of, but there's the balloon rising above the bowl. And there it is going. And it's just a really fascinating set of pictures. It's pretty cool. And there's the picture. But you can see the curvature. And that's what it looks like today. I've actually been over there. It's not that far away.
Yeah.
It's a sweet little hike. And the bowl, it's a pretty little bowl. And they've got a monument there and everything. What's that?
Do they use it for stuff now?
There's people living in it.
Oh.
Yeah,
so they
yeah.
got-
If you look really, really careful, you got there's a
Yeah.
there's a home there, and you like the peace symbol, yeah. So you got homes here. So, but they've left the actual landing site, launch site intact. It's a nice. It's not that far from here. So, I mean, if you're looking for a nice little walk, just go over and there's a monument and all that. Did you have?
How far did they get out the first time before they went down?
I'm going to say it was close to 70. Well, they reached 70 before it started disintegrating. I know by the time the fourth guy got out, it was getting iffy. It was looking pretty bad for him. So yeah.
How far geographically they've got going east, I guess?
I couldn't tell you. Yeah, I know they didn't get very far. Do you like that? Yeah. So there's Kerwin. Okay, that's the old mining camp that Carl Dunwood turned into a dude ranch. Okay, and while they were there, they packed back into so we're talking the southern. I'm going to guess the southern Absaroka. Okay, there's nice lakes up in the mountains and everything. There's Carl and there's Amelia. I'm assuming this picture was taken by George Putnam as they were backpacking back into their lakes. And, I don't know how many of you do tent camp. Is that an actual cat? No, sorry. I'm sorry. I'll hurry up. Okay. I don't know if you guys do tent camping, but I love tent camping. I look at this and she's having fun. She's enjoying this. I mean, the smoke and everything, and yeah. And I'm gonna tell you, I don't know where they were, but there was some fish in that lake. Because I mean, they did start on this trip. Yeah. So that's a good picture. Again, back at the Dude Ranch, Amelia, Carl Dunwood. Carl Dunwood is a story in and of itself. He's a character. There's a good picture. And again, she just looks happy. She really does look happy.
Wow, good shot.
Nice.
And there she is getting a good old cowboy haircut. Yeah. Well, yeah. Like I say, that's a cowboy haircut. It's not a store-bought haircut there. So if you don't know the story, she had such a good time that they actually Dunwood allowed them to start building a cabin there, and that was going to be kind of their retirement home. And it didn't get very far because we're talking right before the disaster. But the remnants of the cabin are still there, and I guess the Forest Service is actually working very, very hard to try and preserve this stuff. So there's the remnants of the cabin that they started building in Wyoming. That was going to be their vacation home once she retired from flying. And then, of course, we all knew this was coming. Yes. So in '36, Purdue University invited Amelia Earhart to join its faculty. If you know anything about Purdue University, they have probably one of the best aeronautical engineering programs in the country. They have one of the best aviation technology programs in the country, and that goes back a ways. And they invited Amelia Earhart to become part of the faculty. And I'm still not exactly sure about the deal here, but Purdue gave Putnam and Earhart enough money to buy a new airplane, a Lockheed Electra 10, which I think is one of the prettiest airplanes ever designed. I mean, this is a pretty little airplane. And the purpose of buying this airplane was to fly it around the world. Okay, and so it was modified to basically be a laboratory to experiment with long distance flying, long distance navigation, things like that. It had additional electronics, had a navigator station. It was supposed to be a passenger airplane, but they turned it into, like I say, a laboratory to experiment with all this stuff. Earhart flew the airplane for the first time July 21st, 1936, and took possession of it 3 days later on her 39th birthday. On March 17th, 1937, and this is where things get so interesting. Originally, The round the world flight was supposed to be west to east. It was supposed to be west to east, which I can't quite figure out why they did that. So a part of my military, I spent some time in the Air Guard down in Cheyenne, and we used to have these old beat up C-130Bs. And I remember one year they got us all excited because they were going to send us to Hawaii to do our summer camp. Hey, guy, you're going to go to Hawaii to do your summer. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's go to Hawaii and do our summer camp. Okay. You know how we got to Hawaii? We flew from Cheyenne to McCord Air Force Base in Washington. From McCord, we flew to Kodiak Island, Alaska. And then from Kodiak, we flew south to Hawaii. Because the B model could not fly nonstop from Travis to Hawaii because of the wind. It didn't have the range, it didn't have the ability to do that. So, yeah, we had to fly to Kodiak to make it to Honolulu. Okay, so again, we all know that. Flying west, you're going to run into wind. Okay, and why they planned initially to fly west to east is beyond me, but they started the trip. So they took off from Oakland, flew to Honolulu, completed the first leg of the trip. Okay, so far so good. Gassed up, rested, When they take off to continue the trip, she crashes the airplane. Okay, and beats it up pretty good. Okay, puts the airplane on a boat, sends it back to California, and Lockheed is going to fix the airplane back up. Okay? In the meantime, Earhart's running around the country trying to get additional sponsorships, trying to get additional funding for her around the world trip. We know that on one of her eastbound trips, on the Transcontinental Airway, she showed up in Cheyenne on April 4th, 1937 in a DC-3, and then on her return trip, May 3rd, 1937, she showed up back in Cheyenne in a United Airlines DC-3. May 19th, 1937, repairs to the Electra were completed, and the aircraft was certified to fly. This time, they're going to begin the trip again. They're going to start up again, but this time we're going to go east to west. Okay, we're not going to do west to east. We're going to go east to west. Okay, so they completely changed their itinerary to a point. So they fly from Oakland, California to Miami, Florida, and then from Miami, June 2nd, from Miami, they go to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and then initially they go to South America, and then across the South Atlantic to Africa. Okay. Now, although we know what happens, I think it's worth remembering what she still managed to accomplish. I mean, my God, she flew from Miami, San Juan, across Africa, across the Middle East, across India, all the way. I mean, that's a hell of an accomplishment. I mean, that's still pretty cool. Okay. But if you read the account, she starts sensing that there's something maybe not good going on. So they stop in Indonesia, Padang, the island of Java, and they stay there for almost a week. Okay, because they're starting to have mechanical issues. They're starting to have issues with their radio equipment and all that good stuff. This is the last time we know that she talked to George Putnam. She actually caught Putnam. He was headed to Oakland on the UP. Okay, going to meet her in Oakland. She's almost done. Okay, going to meet her in Oakland and have a big celebration. All that. So she catches him in Cheyenne. Train stopped in Cheyenne. And they talk on the phone. And this is from Putnam's account. Putnam is everything about the ship good now, which indicates that there had maybe been some problems. Okay. Yes. Good night, hon. Good night. I will be sitting in Oakland waiting for you. Okay, so that's the last time that we know they talked to each other, and again that kind of Wyoming connection. Talk to him in Wyoming. If you probably can't, I know you can't see it, but we're talking around the world flight. Logistically, this was a well-planned flight because if you notice there, this is in Java. You notice that they're refueling the airplane by hand, but if you look on the oil cans, the gas cans, Amelia Earhart. Okay, so they had pre-positioned all this material at designated locations, so they would be there when she showed up and ready to go. So logistically, this was a well planned operation. June 27th, 37, she gets to Timor. 28th, Darwin, where again, she has to have her radio equipment fixed. And so you just kind of get the sense that things aren't going really good with the radio equipment. Then they get to New Guinea, they depart New Guinea, headed for Howland Island, which was going to be the longest overwater part of this trip. It was going to be a long bit of travel over open water, and of course, they're never seen again. So yeah, you can see, so Lay's over here.
When you say they, you're talking about the mechanic, right?
No, it was Noonan was her navigator.
Oh.
Yeah, there were two people on the airplane. You had Amelia Earhart and you had Fred Noonan. Fred Noonan was her navigator. And there were some concerns about him. He had there have been claims that maybe he was a bit of a drinker. But again, this is all part of the myth. You know, it's hard to kind of separate the myth from the fact. But you can see, I mean, they were going to travel over a pretty good stretch of open water. Okay. Now, but again, they had planned for that. They knew that this was going to happen. So if you look at the two views of the airplane, okay, if you notice all the radio antennas, you got an RDF loop here, radio direction finder. I mean, this airplane had all of the most modern equipment that should have allowed her to travel any part of the route that she was flying across. Okay? So again, they had anticipated all of this. On top of which, the United States government provided her with assets to allow her to travel that distance. You had a Coast Guard cutter, the Itasca, was at Howland Island. It was constantly sending her radio directions, radio information that should have allowed her to find her location. You had you had an ocean tug, the USS Ontario. The USS Swan was between Howland and Oahu, and then you had a minesweeper, the Ontario, was between Ley and Howland. Again, to help her navigate that stretch of water. But this is where things get kind of interesting. This is an article I read here recently that indicates that her navigation charts were wrong. That Howland was not where it should have been. That if you look at the chart from 1936 and compare it with current navigation charts, there's something like a 20-mile difference between the locations, which is significant. There was confusion about what radio frequency they were going to broadcast at. You had indications that there was, she was having equipment issues, blah, 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 blah. So she got so far, and then you start sensing that all this logistical planning, all this hard work had started started falling apart. Okay, now then this is where it gets kind of interesting. So this is from a very busy National Geographic map. But Ley, where they took off from, is there. And let me find it. Howland Island is right here. Okay, and then here's Canton Island. It becomes important to the story. Okay, because a couple of days after she was reported missing, between July 4th and the 7th, people start receiving radio signals from her. There have been documented, at least 150 radio signals or radio communications were received around the world, of which 50 are considered credible. And this is our last connection to Wyoming. One was heard by Dana Randolph, a 16-year-old amateur radio enthusiast in Rock Springs, which attracted a lot of attention. Okay, so you got this kid growing up in Rock Springs. Apparently he was a radio whiz. He was a radio savant. He designed his own equipment. He designed his own antennas. He had patented a piece of radio equipment. And he picks up what he claims was a radio broadcast from Amelia Earhart. And there were multiple of these radio broadcasts that were heard by people around the country. And, lie, better, hurry. So across the country, you get these headlines that we've heard from Amelia Earhart. She's in dire straits. There is one theory that she and Noonan couldn't find Howland, but they crash landed at Canton Island. The problem with that is that the Navy sent the USS Colorado, this big battleship, into the area, which had 3 seaplanes, that did an extensive aerial search all over the area. The Navy also sent the USS Lexington into the area to help with the search, which had multiple airplanes that were used to survey the place. And at the same time, Pan American Airways had just instituted regularly scheduled flights from San Francisco to Auckland, New Zealand. Oh, by the way, one of their stops was Canton Island. So Pan American had surveyed, and nobody found head or tails of Amelia Earhart. Which brings us to January of this year. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but there was a search that was made in the area, and this search team thinks that they might have found Amelia Earhart's airplane at the bottom of the sea. I'm holding judgment, okay? The problem with this is this. If you're familiar with World War II, so that's Howland, that's Canton. This part of the Pacific was a battleground. I mean, this was a battleground. You had Midway, you had Coral Sea, you had Guadalcanal, you had the battle for New Guinea. I mean, this part of the world was a massive battleground. There were airplanes crashing into the ocean constantly. So until they actually do a deep dive, go down and actually verify what they found, I'm going to hold
So what makes
up to
them
it.
think that it is
Well, it just,
just the area?
that's just the area, and
If the
and they
airplane
look
is
at.
in the bottom of the sea, how could she make any radio calls?
Well, see, there's all that's going to have to be, yeah. The good news is this, okay? If you know your American naval history, remember the Lexington that we just talked about a little bit earlier? It got sunk at the bottom at the Battle of Coral Sea. Well, they have found it, and these are pictures of some of the airplanes that it took to the bottom with it, and look how good shape they're in. These are amazing. These airplanes are in amazing shape. If you look, they've still got the kill symbols, they've got the squadron insignia, So if that airplane, if that is indeed an airplane, and it looks like an airplane, my guess is going to be pretty well preserved, okay, based on this evidence. And so, again, we're talking a pretty expensive operation, so we'll have to wait and see. But until then, people ask me what do I think happened. I think she ran out of gas and crashed into the ocean. The second thing is but I think it is plausible that she maybe did have enough time to broadcast a signal, possibly. But that's as far as I'm going to go. I think she just ran out of gas and crashed in the ocean in the story. But there's two what ifs here. I mean, there's just two what ifs here. Think about this. Okay, what if she hadn't crashed in Hawaii and continued west? What if she had actually completed that first trip? What if? The other thing, this is just kind of in between her two attempts. The first start where she crashed in Hawaii and then restarted, from Miami. The Department of Commerce had put an embargo on transatlantic flying, okay? Because too many people were crashing. I mean, they were just having too many problems with this kind of stuff. But because she had started before the embargo, they grandfather or grandmothered her, I guess, and she was allowed to continue the trip. But what if the Department of Commerce said, no, you can't do it? Okay, so you got these what ifs kind of hanging over everything. So this is a quote from one of her Cosmo articles. I have flown above and below and through seas of clouds, and I ever find this new world worth the great price of its conquest. And you kind of hope that maybe, you kind of hope that that's what she was thinking. And,
that she was going to do it no matter what.
Yeah. Okay, so this is just one of the projects I'm working on. I'm working on a history of aviation in Wyoming between the wars, and I'm also doing a history of the Cold War in Wyoming. As far as that project is concerned, one of the things I'm looking at is the use of seismic technologies to detect nuclear weapon detonation. If you know your history of Weston County, you know that there was a seismic station here in the county. And guess what? I'm going to be back October 8th to talk about seismology in Wyoming and keeping track on the Soviet Union and their atomic weapons technology. That ought to be a real fun, uplifting one. So if you like this talk, come on back and we'll have more fun with that one. So Thank you. So I know we had some, do we have any additional questions or concerns, observations, anything? Yes, sir.
Have you ever been over to Kerwin?
To Kerwin? I have not been to Kerwin. No.
I hear it's a pretty good.
Well, the pictures I've seen, it's in a valley. And so they were doing mining there, so it's probably, granitic, and it's one of those classic Wyoming mountain valleys. And I hear it's gorgeous, I just haven't made my, You really have to really want to go there. I haven't quite gotten there yet.
Our son-in-law went there.
Did he?
He found it real interesting.
Well, I bet you. I need to get over there.
You say there was a big avalanche there years ago that come in and killed several people.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me, yeah. Okay, thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
The ones that start slow, but boy, by mid-season, you see something, and by the end of the year, they're the scary team nobody wants to play. Those are more fun than the teams that come in that are going to dominate, and they are dominating. You're almost afraid to lose when you've got really, really good teams and high expectations.
Oh, for sure.
Those are fun seasons. Is there that potential in Dobie sports this year for some of those programs?
I think it's possible. Kobe coming down into 3A this year is going to scare quite a few of us old 3Ers, but we do have that potential for growth. We are not coming in at the beginning of the season at our highest potential, which frankly, you don't want. You want your team to grow. You want your team to develop and then get to that point by the end of the season to have that shot at postseason play.